This revenge story contains intense acts of retribution that may be excessive and could be disturbing to some viewers.
It started with little things so small that Cooper almost missed them. The way Sonia's smile didn't quite reach her eyes during dinner. How she'd stopped humming while doing the dishes, a habit she'd had since they first moved in together. The slight hesitation before checking her phone when it buzzed. Normal changes, he told himself. Everyone had off days. But as January melted into February, the little things began to multiply. She'd taken to double-checking the locks before bed, sometimes 3 times in a row. She'd switched her morning running route, claiming she wanted a change of scenery. When he suggested they try that new cafe downtown, the one she'd been excited about just weeks ago, she quickly changed the subject. "You're quiet tonight," Cooper said one evening, watching her push pasta around her plate. The kitchen was warm, filled with the aroma of garlic bread he'd picked up from the Italian deli she loved. "Work stuff?" Sonia glanced up, her fork pausing mid-motion. "Oh, yeah, just tired. The Henderson account is taking forever to close." It was a perfectly reasonable explanation, but something in her tone felt rehearsed, as if she'd practiced the words before saying them. Cooper took a sip of water, studying her over the rim of his glass. The shadows under her eyes seemed darker lately, though she'd started wearing more makeup than usual. "Maybe we should take a weekend trip," he suggested. "Get away from the city for a bit. Remember that bed and breakfast in Vermont we talked about?" "I don't know," she said too quickly. "I should probably stay close to the office until this deal closes." Cooper nodded, but the knot in his stomach tightened. The Sonia he knew would have jumped at the chance for a getaway. She was always the spontaneous one, planning last-minute adventures and dragging him along on impromptu road trips. Later that night, as they sat on the couch watching some Netflix show neither of them was really following, Cooper noticed how she'd positioned herself. Usually, she'd curl up against him, her head on his shoulder. Tonight, she sat with her knees pulled up to her chest, a throw pillow hugged tightly against her body. A protective posture. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. "Of course," she replied, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Why wouldn't it be?" "Because you're different," he wanted to say. "Because something's changed, and I can't figure out what it is." But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he reached for her hand, and for a moment, just a moment, felt her flinch before she let him take it. As they lay in bed that night, Cooper listened to Sonia's breathing, waiting for it to settle into the familiar rhythm of sleep. It didn't come. She tossed and turned, adjusting her pillow, checking her phone. When she finally drifted off, he stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. Something was wrong. The certainty of it pressed against his chest, heavy and cold. But every time he tried to put his finger on it, the evidence slipped away like smoke. There were no dramatic changes, no sudden transformations. Just 1,000 tiny shifts that added up to a picture he couldn't quite make out. Watching her sleep, Cooper's mind drifted back to their college days, to the first time he'd seen her walk into that crowded fraternity house. Back then, everything had seemed so simple, so clear. He remembered how she'd glowed with confidence, how her laugh had cut through the noise of the party like a bell. When had that glow started to fade? And more importantly, why? The air buzzed with energy, a mix of laughter, music, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. It was another Friday night at the fraternity house, the kind of evening where time seemed to stretch endlessly before you. Cooper stood near the edge of the crowded living room, clutching a red Solo cup half filled with warm beer. He wasn't much for parties, at least not like this, but it was part of the deal when you pledged Delta Tau. Besides, he told himself, it wasn't so bad. There were always people around, always something happening. For a guy who'd spent most of his life feeling like an outsider, that kind of constant motion felt safe. And then there was Sonia. She walked into the room like she owned it, her golden hair catching the light as she laughed at something one of her sorority sisters said. She wore a simple black dress that hugged her curves just enough to turn heads without trying too hard. Confidence radiated off her in waves, drawing everyone in like moths to a flame. Cooper had seen her around campus before. How could he not? But tonight was different. Tonight she noticed him. "Hey," she said, sliding up beside him with a grin. "You look like you're about to bolt." Cooper blinked, startled. "What?" "No, I'm good." "Sure you are," she teased, leaning against the wall next to him. "You've got that whole I'd rather be anywhere else vibe going on." He opened his mouth to protest, but stopped himself. What was the point? She was right. Instead, he shrugged. "Maybe I am. Doesn't mean I don't appreciate the free drinks." Sonia laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Fair enough. But if you stick around long enough, you might actually have fun." That was how it started. A casual conversation that turned into hours of talking, laughing, and discovering they had more in common than either of them expected. By the end of the night, they'd exchanged numbers, promising to meet up again soon. And they did. Over coffee, late-night study sessions, and lazy afternoons by the lake, their connection deepened. But college wasn't just about romance and new beginnings. It was also about navigating the messy web of relationships, rivalries, and power dynamics. And no one embodied that complexity quite like Raymond. Raymond was everything. Cooper wasn't. Bold, charismatic, and effortlessly magnetic. He commanded attention wherever he went, whether it was during frat meetings or at parties like this one. People gravitated toward him, eager to soak up even a fraction of his confidence. At first, Cooper admired him, or at least wanted to. Raymond had taken him under his wing during pledging, showing him the ropes and helping him find his footing in the frat. But beneath the charm lay something darker, something possessive. It became clear early on that Raymond had feelings for Sonia. He made no secret of it, often dropping hints about how perfect they'd be together. When she finally agreed to go out with him, Cooper tried to brush it off. After all, it wasn't like he and Sonia were exclusive. They were just friends, weren't they? Their relationship didn't last long. Just a few months. But it left its mark. Sonia confided in Cooper afterward, telling him how suffocating it had been. How Raymond would call her constantly, demanding to know where she was and who she was with. How he refused to let her move on, even after they broke up. "He filmed us," she admitted one night, her voice barely above a whisper. "During, he said he deleted the videos, but I don't think he did." Cooper felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you serious?" She nodded, her eyes filled with shame. "I thought it was just harmless stuff, like couples do sometimes. But now I'm not so sure. He's the kind of guy who likes to keep trophies." The air in the house had grown heavier over the past few weeks, thick with an unspoken tension that neither Cooper nor Sonia could ignore. It started subtly amidst dinner here, a distracted glance there, but soon, Sonia's behavior became impossible to overlook. She was quieter than usual, her laughter replaced by long stretches of silence. Her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching, and her once bright eyes seemed hollow, as if weighed down by something she couldn't or wouldn't share. Cooper tried to brush it off at first, chalking it up to stress or exhaustion. But deep down, he couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion that something else was going on. He noticed the way she flinched every time her phone buzzed, how she'd disappear into the bathroom for hours, only to emerge looking even more drained. And then there were the nights when she didn't come home until late, claiming she'd been working late or meeting friends. Jealousy began to creep in, insidious and unwelcome. Was she seeing someone else? The thought made his stomach churn, but he pushed it aside, telling himself he was being irrational. Still, the questions lingered. Why was she so distant? Why did she avoid his gaze whenever he asked where she'd been? One evening, after another sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, Cooper decided to confront her. "Sonia," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "What's going on with you? You've been acting different lately." She froze mid-step, her back to him. For a moment she didn't respond, and Cooper wondered if she'd even heard him. Then, without turning around, she muttered, "I'm fine." "You're not fine," he snapped, sharper than he intended. "You're never home, you barely talk to me anymore, and when you do, you look like you're about to cry." "I'm not stupid, Sonia. Is there someone else?" Her head whipped around, her eyes wide with shock. "What? No? How could you even think that?" "I don't know what to think," he shot back, his voice rising. "You won't tell me anything." For a split second, guilt flickered across her face, but it was gone before he could be sure. She shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Just drop it, okay, please." But Cooper couldn't drop it. The more she withdrew, the more convinced he became that she was hiding something. He started checking her phone when she wasn't looking, scrolling through texts and call logs, searching for any clue. But there was nothing, no incriminating messages, no evidence of betrayal. Just endless notifications from work emails and social media updates. Meanwhile, Sonia's condition continued to deteriorate. She stopped eating properly, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Dark circles formed under her eyes, and her skin took on a pale, almost translucent quality. One morning, as she stood in front of the mirror brushing her hair, Cooper caught sight of her reflection and felt a pang of fear. She looked like a ghost of the woman he loved. Then came the day she finally broke down. It was late afternoon, the sunlight streaming weakly through the kitchen window. Sonia sat at the table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Cooper watched her from across the room, his heart pounding as he braced himself for whatever she was about to say. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, urging her to continue. "I'm pregnant." The words hit him like a freight train. His mind raced, trying to process what she'd just said. Pregnant? That was incredible, joyful. But then why did she look so devastated? "That's amazing," he said cautiously, forcing a smile. "Isn't it?" Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know whose it is," she choked out, her voice breaking. Cooper felt the floor drop out from beneath him. "What do you mean?" "It's either yours or Raymond's." The name sent a jolt of rage coursing through him. Raymond. Of course it was Raymond. That smug, manipulative bastard who had always hovered in the background of their lives, waiting for a chance to ruin everything. "What happened?" Cooper demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Sonia sobbed harder, her body shaking uncontrollably. "He cornered me at the coffee shop. Told me he still has those videos from college, the ones I thought he deleted. He said if I didn't do what he wanted, he'd release them. Everyone would see them, Cooper. My family, my friends." Her voice trailed off, but Cooper already knew where this was headed. "He forced me into his car," she whispered, her hands clutching the edge of the table. He assaulted me, filmed the whole thing. Said if I told anyone, he'd make sure the videos went viral, and now," she gestured helplessly at her stomach, "now I don't even know whose baby this is." Cooper's fists clenched so tightly, his nails dug into his palms. His vision blurred with fury, but he forced himself to stay calm for Sonia's sake. "I'm so sorry," she cried, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't know what to do. I was scared, and I didn't want to hurt you. But I can't keep lying. Not anymore." He reached for her, pulling her into his arms. She collapsed against him, her tears soaking into his shirt. "It's not your fault," he murmured, though his voice was strained with anger. "None of this is your fault." But as he held her, he couldn't help feeling the weight of everything they were up against. Raymond had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And Cooper knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let Raymond win. Not this time. Cooper sat in the dim glow of his laptop screen, the soft hum of the fan filling the otherwise silent room. It was late. Too late. But sleep had become a luxury he couldn't afford. Not anymore. Every click of the mouse, every keystroke, felt like a step closer to reclaiming control. Raymond had taken so much from them. Sonia's peace of mind, their sense of safety, even the future they dreamed of. But Cooper wasn't about to let him take anything else. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the files scattered across his desktop. Screenshots of Raymond's texts, photos of him with other women, emails detailing his manipulative schemes, all evidence of the man's depravity. Each piece was a shard of glass, sharp and jagged, cutting deeper into the facade Raymond had built around himself. And now, it was time to shatter that facade completely. "Are you sure about this?" Sonia asked softly from the doorway. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, as if trying to hold herself together. Cooper glanced up, his jaw tightening. "Do we have a choice?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, but what if it doesn't work? What if he retaliates?" "He will," Cooper admitted, his voice low. "But we can't keep living like this, Sonia. We can't let him win." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She trusted him. That was all he needed. The first post went live just after midnight. An anonymous account, created specifically for this purpose, began sharing snippets of Raymond's misdeeds. At first, it was subtle, a cryptic tweet hinting at corruption within a prominent hedge fund, followed by a blurry photo of Raymond at a private party, surrounded by women who looked far too young to be there. The internet buzzed almost immediately. Comments poured in, speculating about the identity of the mysterious whistleblower and the man behind the accusations. Cooper watched it unfold with a mix of satisfaction and unease. This was only the beginning. Over the next few days, the posts grew bolder. He shared screenshots of Raymond's texts, exposing his predatory behavior toward women. One message stood out: "If you don't do what I say, I'll make sure everyone knows your secrets." Beneath it, Cooper added a caption. "Sound familiar?" The response was explosive. Women started coming forward, sharing their own stories of how Raymond had manipulated and abused them. Some claimed he'd blackmailed them into silence. Others said he'd sabotaged their careers when they refused his advances. Each story added fuel to the fire, turning the flames hotter, brighter. Cooper knew he was playing a dangerous game. Every post brought them closer to justice, but it also made them more vulnerable. Raymond wasn't the kind of man to sit idly by while his empire crumbled. He would fight back. And when he did, it wouldn't be pretty. Still, Cooper pressed on. He spent hours combing through old messages, digging up dirt on Raymond's professional life. The man worked at a prestigious hedge fund, where he'd risen quickly through the ranks. But success had come at a cost. Cooper uncovered emails showing how Raymond had falsified reports, embezzled funds, and sabotaged colleagues to secure his position. One evening, as Sonia slept fitfully in the next room, Cooper drafted his most damning post yet. It included a detailed timeline of Raymond's crimes, complete from personal betrayals to corporate fraud. Before hitting publish, he paused, his finger hovering over the mouse. Was he crossing a line? Using someone else's pain to exact revenge? The thought gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. This wasn't just about vengeance. It was about survival. For Sonia, for the baby, for the life they deserved. When the post went live, it spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying the allegations against Raymond. His coworkers began distancing themselves, afraid of being tainted by association. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, casting wary glances at his penthouse apartment. Raymond's world was unraveling, and Cooper could see the cracks forming, but he wasn't done yet. Because men like Raymond didn't surrender, they struck back, and Cooper needed to be ready. The abandoned parking lot was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums and made you hyper-aware of every breath, every heartbeat. Cooper stood beside Sonia, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He could feel her trembling next to him, though she tried to hide it. Her hand brushed against his for a brief moment, seeking reassurance. He gave it a quick squeeze before letting go, his eyes fixed on the dark figure approaching from the shadows. Raymond emerged slowly, his silhouette illuminated by the faint glow of a distant street lamp. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but there was something predatory in the way he moved, like a wolf circling its prey. In one hand, he held his phone, its screen casting an unnatural blue light across his face. "You came," he said, his voice low and mocking. "I wasn't sure you'd have the guts." Cooper stepped forward, putting himself between Sonia and Raymond. "Let's get this over with," he growled, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Raymond smirked, his gaze flicking dismissively over Cooper before settling on Sonia. "You look good, Sonia," he said, his tone dripping with false sweetness. "Pregnancy suits you." Sonia flinched, her arms wrapping protectively around her stomach. Cooper felt a surge of rage, but he forced himself to stay calm. Losing control now would only play into Raymond's hands. "Enough games," Cooper snapped. "What do you want?" Raymond tilted his head, feigning innocence. "Oh, I think you already know. You've been busy lately, haven't you? Spreading lies about me online, ruining my reputation." "They're not lies," Cooper shot back. "Everything I posted is true, and you know it." For a split second, Raymond's mask slipped, revealing the raw fury beneath. But just as quickly he composed himself, his smirk returning. "Even if they are, does it really matter? Do you honestly think anyone cares? People like me always land on top, Cooper. Always." Cooper took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "Not this time." Raymond's smile widened, but there was no humor in it. Only malice. "You think you're some kind of hero, protecting your little family? Let me tell you something, Cooper. She'll never be yours. Not completely. No matter what happens, she'll always remember me." Before Cooper could respond, Sonia stepped forward, her voice shaking but defiant. "You're wrong, Raymond. I don't remember you at all. You're nothing to me." Raymond's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. For a moment, the air seemed to crackle with tension, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, without warning, Raymond lunged at Cooper, his fist swinging wildly. Cooper reacted instinctively, sidestepping the blow and grabbing Raymond's arm. They grappled briefly, their movements clumsy but fueled by adrenaline. Raymond was stronger than he looked, but Cooper had something Raymond didn't. Purpose. "You think you can ruin me?" Raymond spat, his voice hoarse with rage. "I'll destroy you both." Behind them, Sonia screamed, her voice piercing the night. "Stop! Please stop!" But neither man heard her. They were locked in their own private battle, each punch, each shove carrying the weight of years of anger, fear, and betrayal. Just as Raymond managed to break free, headlights cut through the darkness. Tires screeched as multiple cars skidded to a halt around the parking lot. Doors slammed and uniformed officers poured out, their flashlights slicing through the gloom. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" Raymond froze, his chest heaving as he stared at the officers surrounding him. For a moment he looked like he might try to run, but then his shoulders sagged in defeat. Cooper backed away, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. Sonia rushed to his side, throwing her arms around him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her tears soaking into his shirt. "I'm so sorry." "It's okay," he murmured, holding her close. "It's over now." As the officers cuffed Raymond and read him his rights, Cooper watched him closely. There was no remorse in Raymond's eyes, only hatred, a burning, unyielding rage directed squarely at them. "You haven't seen the last of me," Raymond snarled as he was led to a squad car. Cooper didn't respond. He didn't need to. Whatever threats Raymond made now were empty. He was going to prison, and Cooper and Sonia were finally free. By the time the squad car pulled away, its red and blue lights fading into the distance, Cooper and Sonia were alone again. The parking lot felt emptier now, quieter, as if the world itself had exhaled. "We did it," Sonia said softly, her voice filled with disbelief. Cooper nodded, pulling her closer. "Yeah, we did." And for the first time in months, they allowed themselves to believe it. The weeks following Raymond's arrest felt like walking through a fog. The immediate danger was gone, but the scars it left behind were deep and raw. For Sonia, every quiet moment seemed to echo with memories she couldn't escape. She would sit by the window, staring out at the street below, her hands resting absently on her growing belly. Cooper watched her from the doorway, his heart aching as he saw how fragile she still was. "Do you want me to make some tea?" he asked one evening, breaking the silence. Sonia turned to him, startled, as if she hadn't noticed he was there. Then she smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Sure," she said softly. "That'd be nice." He nodded and headed to the kitchen, filling the kettle and setting it on the stove. As the water began to boil, he leaned against the counter, closing his eyes for a moment. It wasn't over, not really. Even with Raymond locked away, the weight of what had happened lingered between them, an invisible barrier they were both too exhausted to dismantle. When he returned with 2 steaming mugs, Sonia was sitting at the table, her fingers tracing the edge of a photo frame. It was an old picture of the two of them from college, a candid shot taken during a picnic, their faces lit up with laughter. "I forgot we even had this," she murmured, holding it up for him to see. Cooper smiled, sitting down across from her. "Yeah, that was a good day. It feels like another lifetime," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. "We'll get there again, Sonia, I promise." She looked at him then, her gaze searching his face as if trying to find reassurance in his words. "Do you really believe that?" "I have to," he replied honestly. "For you. For us."